Hello, folks, and thanks for listening. Today I am joined by my good friend, Steve Amedio. Steve has started and sold multiple companies. He started one of my favorite charities. He's been a fairly active investor, to say the least, in startups for quite some time. And he also owns a gym that I like to frequent. I hope to cover all of this and more. Steve, thanks for joining me on this St. Patty's Day.
Yeah, my pleasure, John. I'm a quarter Irish, if that counts.
Quarter Irish?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. I'm
right.
66% Scottish, British, Irish, according to
there you
23andMe, and I'm 98% Northern European. So I'm
gotta do
about
that.
as white boy as they come.
Yeah, you are. I got to do that 23andMe. I like that. I need to do that.
It's pretty awesome. I suspect you're going to have quite a bit more Neanderthal chromosomes than I do.
It seems reasonable. Seems like a reasonable guess. Yeah.
So first question, what was your last workout? I know what your next one is because you're not drinking with me on St. Patty's Day because you've got a WOD today.
That's right. I do have a WOD later. Last workout was a hour Peloton ride, as a matter of fact, yesterday afternoon with Matt Wilpers, who does most of the heart rate and power zone rides.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very cool. And you do a lot of different workouts that I hope to touch on some of this because I think that that's a big and important part of for many entrepreneurs. I think we've historically lionized not having a work-life balance, and we've lionized working very hard and eating a shitty diet. And I think it's so important that people who want to perform well in their mind also have to perform well in their body. So hopefully we can dig into that today a little bit.
Yeah, no question. I'll tell you a fun fact that very few people, other than a few other of my early employees and business partners, know. My first company, I spent probably the first 6 months sleeping under my desk, writing software, and not only did it unfortunately cost me my, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, cost me my first marriage. I also got to the heaviest I've ever been in my life, which was 230 pounds. I weigh 188 now, and it was for that very reason. All I did was work and ignored taking care of myself and the people around me, and that is, while entrepreneurism is a wonderful life, that was not. That was not a wonderful life, nor was it entrepreneurism. It was a skewed version of how hard people thought they had to work in order to be successful, and that it's not the way to roll.
I agree. I came out in 2000. I got out of undergrad, and I went to one of these ChurnhamandBurnham.com consulting businesses. And I will say, working 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week, you learn a lot, but you gain a lot of weight, and you end up introducing all sorts of brain fog. And I'm glad to see that there is a movement in general towards, hey, let's try to balance things out, including our health and fitness as well. How important do you think that is when you're talking to younger entrepreneurs now? Do you think they understand it? Is it something that you need to reiterate for them? Or
Yeah, I think it still has to be communicated and mentored and coached as much as possible, especially for as you indicated, younger entrepreneurs. I think, the broad umbrella is life balance, right? But that means a lot of things. It certainly means exercise and taking care of your body, means nutrition, but it also means taking care of relationships and the people around you, the people that love you and the people you love. And, you've got to bring all of that in order to successfully, maybe not to start a business, but to last and have it be successful and potentially exit it. I think you've got to have some perspective in that process. And I think that's, across the board.
Well, I think you hit on a great point there. We as a culture like to lionize the lone wolf entrepreneur, and you and I know that's bullshit. It takes more than a village, right?
Yeah.
It takes an ecosystem. It takes people around you, and importantly, it takes those relationships. Even if your family and your loved ones aren't working in the business, and hopefully they aren't, but they're very important to this success. And you made another great point, which is it's one thing to start a business; it's a whole other thing to grow it, nurture it, and ultimately exit it and at scale. So.
Yeah, no question. And I guess important to note and add to that kind of umbrella of life balance is mental health. I think. Mental health is a problem in the U.S. right now for sure. Certainly post-COVID, but also pre-COVID, and I think it's particularly onerous for entrepreneurs. And I find a lot of young, especially entrepreneurs, that are headed down a path that is not going to end well in terms of their their mood and maybe worse, their overall mental health condition. And so I think that's another thing that's got to be talked about and has to be educated around and has to be coached.
Yeah, it's tough because it's a bunch of interconnected things. It's eating right, it's supplements, it's getting the right amount of sleep, it's putting the right things into your mind, not just into your body, putting the right things into your soul or whatever, your spirit, whatever you want to call that.
That's
and
right.
I think it's hard to approach all of those, but I do find that as you start to fix bits and pieces of that, because I was very broken at one point, like what you described. I got up to 255 pounds. I'm a bit taller than you, and I was slow and lethargic, and I couldn't think right, and I was working till 2-3 in the morning. And at some point I just said, I've got to start fixing this. And what I found was, for me personally, it was fixing diet first, then fixing exercise, then finding meditation and breathing patterns. And so I think that once you start to the good news is once you start to fix a couple things, they start to fall into place and things become easier to address. But it's hard when everything seems to be to be broken, right?
Yeah, I think, and in particular, I think nutrition, certainly and exercise, but also, as you indicated, meditation. Explore some of those things that you might have thought were either difficult or out of reach for you, because I think those are equally as valuable for sure.
Yep, absolutely. So I'd like to go through your history a bit. Where are you from and where did you go to school? I don't even know this as well as I know you.
Yeah,
so.
No, it's fine. I am from upstate New York. I grew up in a small town on Lake Ontario called Oswego, New York, and lived there my first 18 years until I went to college. I went to college at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia.
Mm-hmm. I know VCU well.
It's a good spot. I love Richmond. Great town. Lived in the Fan. Cool, eclectic, great place to go to school. A lot of fun. And left Virginia and came down to North Carolina shortly after graduation from VCU, and have been here in Charlotte ever since.
So where did you start your career once you came down here, or was it before you came down here that you started your career?
No, it wasn't until I came down here that I started my career. But I had to give my my father some props. It didn't go past me that he was an entrepreneur, that he had started his own business out of necessity, not out of desire, but he worked at a mill, a factory that was shut down, and began to take a hobby business, which was a trucking business, and turned it into the primary income for his family, and raised 6 kids that way. My brother Tommy, who's here with me right now, still runs that family business, which is great.
Awesome.
Yep. And
it's so good to have those mentors and role models to look up to. I mean, almost everybody that I talk to who's a successful entrepreneur themselves can point to somebody. It's very fortunate when it's a father or a mother, but you have to have somebody.
And I think it's also, I like to note that or footnote that, not just to for my father, although I miss him dearly and love him and appreciated everything he did for us, but also because I think there's a general misconception that if you're an entrepreneur, you must be in tech or in software or in some kind of modern economy business. And the reality is 99% of the entrepreneurs in the U.S. are running restaurants and dry cleaners and hotels and trucking businesses, and they're not in tech and they're not in software. And I love those businesses. I hope to return to them here in the near future to invest in and operate some of them. And to me, those are the real entrepreneurs. Having a small business is being an entrepreneur. The fact that you're not raising capital or that you're not going to exit it to some private equity firm or some strategic doesn't mean you're not an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It's just a different path. And I think those people don't get a lot of credit.
I agree. And for me, I didn't. My father isn't what you'd call entrepreneurial. He worked for a utility company his entire career and retired from there, and did just fine. But he wasn't entrepreneurial. But I was very fortunate to work at a stereo shop where I worked directly with the owner of the stereo shop, and that's the lessons that he taught me. I'll never forget. Walk the showroom or walk your inventory room every morning so that you only sell what you have. Don't sell something that you don't have, because that'll drive your gross margins up.
Absolutely.
Start at the top, understand your customer. If the customer comes in and that they're higher income, don't show them the entry level cassette deck. Show them the top of the line, because it's always easier to downsell.
Right.
And these are things that apply in anything
Absolutely.
that we do.
And selling is key, right? At every level, no matter what business you're in, you're going to be selling. And I think probably 30 years before somebody out there coined the customer is king, my father was telling me that the customer's always right.
Yeah.
So I think those are tried and true kind of expressions of entrepreneurism that somehow we've left behind in all the modern tech era. But
well, I think we celebrate the Facebooks and the Instagrams of the world, but I think especially after COVID, we appreciate the small businesses. I think it's unfortunate, not to get political here, but I think it is an unfortunate consequence that the bigger businesses came out of COVID stronger, and a lot of smaller businesses just evaporated. But I think even if our politicians and policymakers don't understand that, I think the people that I talk to understand that and have a very big appreciation for the local restaurants, the local,
absolutely,
the local businesses, when especially when many of them have been lost.
I'm hoping that the reopening is an absolute boom for local and small business.
Yep.
So.
And you may have seen this in your gym. I had Stu Brower in here, who owns Urban Movement, and
cool.
He was very fortunate because very early on he creates a lot of content, and he was able to create a video experience that was a very good virtual experience. He quickly was able to lease out equipment, or not lease out, but give out equipment to people and then give them a virtual experience. And so he only lost 3% of his revenue.
Oh, that's impressive.
Yeah. And he was very lucky because he overbuilt this gym because he was building a concept that he's franchising now. Mm-hmm. So he had enough equipment to do it, and he really the revenue didn't drop off. But what he saw was that when they reopened their doors, there was a bunch of pent-up demand, and a lot of people signed up, and their numbers were up 30-40%.
That's great.
Going into that. Did you guys see something similar? Or
we did something not quite as organized because we're a kind of a local gym, no intention to be anything other than that. But we did allowed all of our members to come in and take the equipment from the gym, build their own home gyms if they would continue to pay.
I remember I had to donate some of my home gyms so that we could keep working out.
So we could keep working out of the gym. That's right. We ran out of weights. So during that time period, we did that, and it worked out wonderfully. People worked out at home. They had gear for the first time. They turned their garages and their backyards and everything else into home gyms. They continued to pay their dues, and that's what kept us afloat and why we're still here today. And as you indicated, and what happened to him is started to happen to us too. People, gyms are a social experience. They help build community for sure. And there's competition and everything else healthy that happens at gyms, and so people are starting to come back and sign up, and so we certainly have more members now than we did pre-COVID.
That's great. Well, hopefully other industries see that as they start to reopen, and it does seem like the reopening is real and even happening in places like New York and California now.
Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, it's real.
So I met you during the Techniques days. You guys recently sold Techniques. I think it was TKXS by the time you sold it, or maybe that's what it became when you sold it. But can you tell the listeners what TKXS does?
Yeah, for sure. TKXS would be an agriculture business, an ag tech business. And it was Techniques. Techniques was founded by Jack Ross and Preston Fay, two of my business partners that continue doing business together, both of whom are still working there. Techniques was merged with XS Ag in Raleigh in 2018, and three founders there, Bill Barton, Thad Armbruster, and Fulton Breen. Good guys, been in the ag space the whole time, as had Jack Preston and I. They were both 15, 18-year-old businesses with good track records, and we merged them to kind of achieve some scale with the hopes that we could grow over 4 or 5 years and be attractive to either private equity or a strategic. As it happened, a year after we merged those businesses in the summer of 2019, we were able to close a transaction with a public company in Canada, TELUS. TELUS, the telecommunications company, but they also have a diversified business. They're in international IT and people outsourcing. Through one of their lines of business. They're in healthcare data in Canada as well too. And they had, I think, great vision and the foresight to decide that their next foray into diversifying their telecommunications business would be to take a bigger position in agriculture. And for those in ag or who are familiar with ag, they'd know that Canada is already a big player in the ag space, and TELUS is a Canadian company. And so they decided
I believe Nutrien is as well. They're a big
right.
player in that space.
They're huge.
What is it about Canada?
Yeah, I know. Well, it's mostly the western part of the state, and it's the cereals business that drives it mostly. They're a huge producer in cereals, and I think at one point we're the number 5. They might be the number 4 now, global player in ag. So they laid down a diversification strategy that would be a classic kind of what PE people would refer to as a roll up. Mm-hmm. Go and find an anchor business, and
so were you the platform business in that strategy?
Yeah, we were the platform business. We were a business that had been around for a long time. We had tremendous relationships and a lot of relationship capital in agribusiness. We had some platform technologies and some intellectual property around software that was interesting, and so that became their platform acquisition. And for whoever will hear this, I think it's important to say, because every entrepreneur is faced with hopefully the opportunity to exit a business successfully. And you imagine what that could look like, and you hear great stories and you hear horror stories, but you probably hear more horror stories, not financially, but as it relates to kind of what becomes of the business that you spent 20 years building or however long, what becomes of your employees. And at least as we sit here today, I can say, and I'm thrilled to say that, TELUS had a vision. They acquired us at a very fair price. They have continued to fulfill that vision. They've acquired, I don't track it exactly, but 8 or 10 more companies in the space. They've built a substantial global agriculture presence in a very short period of time. And they've treated us as founders and former business owners and our employees with tremendous respect, and provided us great opportunity, and continue to do so. And so, I tend to, I would have always hoped probably for a strategic on exit, because I think that's a little better, especially if you want to leave a legacy, than a PE. PE is going to have to turn an asset again at some point. But with TELUS, we knew they were long on ag. They get into those businesses and they stay. And so we thought that could be more interesting. And, as far as acquirers go, they've lived up to every aspect of the vision that they laid out, and kept every promise they've made to us. So, it's a good story. But I'm also saying that because I want people to know that they're a good company, and if you're out there and in their pipeline, you would want to consider them, because they did a great deal.
That's a great point. I had a gentleman named Dave Dalton on, who his father owned a textile business in Charlotte back when North Carolina was the center of that universe. And I guess in some ways they still are. It's just not all manufactured here necessarily. But his dad sold to a company, and it had left a bad taste in his mouth, and he talked about it. And Dave and his dad bought a manufacturing business, a printed circuit board manufacturer up in Mooresville. And when it was time to sell the company, they were very careful about selecting the right partner, because they had such a bad experience. And you hear about some terrible ones. And I've been involved in some where there were prior companies that were acquired along the way. Red Hat in particular had done a couple of really bad integrations prior to acquiring Amentra, and they were very thoughtful and very careful, and we had a wonderful experience. And the way I measure it is, I look at the number of people who came from the original Amentra team who are now meaningful executives within Red Hat, and there are a group of probably 15 or 20 people who have just fantastic roles, really making decisions in there. Great. And that's what you look for.
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly right.
You don't want the other experiences that you hear about where the entire team leaves and the business essentially dissolves, which does happen.
Which does happen. It absolutely does. No, that part has gone exceptionally well, and there are still several, many of my former employees that are in critical and key leadership roles in the growing TELUS Ag business.
That's awesome. Just going to move your mic up a little.
Yeah, sure.
It sounds good, but it's as if you move a little, it's going off axis, so that should be. But we'll edit that later. So yeah, that ag market is fascinating. There's a lot of consolidation, and there's just a handful of mega players at this point. I'm thinking, what was the big one? What was the big acquisition that happened there? DuPont. Oh
yeah, DuPont and Dow formed Corteva.
Okay,
it was one of the largest deals in the space to happen in a long time. And then ultimately Dow and DuPont merged and split into 3 businesses: a material sciences business, an ag business, and a third one that's eluding me at the moment. But their ag business became Corteva, and it's a huge player in the space.
Yeah, and I mentioned Nutrien. I worked with them in a prior life, and I know that was a product of quite a bit of consolidation as well. Maybe they came out of the
They're in the distribution side.
They're in the distribution side.
So they're a distributor, but have continue to invest, and have acquired lots of IT, lots of software assets and other technology over the years. They're a massive player in the space.
So there's all this consolidation. Obviously, we're trying to feed a growing world, and we're not growing the amount of land that we have.
That's right. That's right.
So you expect to see a lot of innovation happening there and moving fast. What did you guys do at Techniques to keep pace with the industry as it changed?
Yeah. So the industry can be kind of broken up into a few key segments. I'll use I'll describe the world of agriculture through the lens of TELUS, because it was their kind of a template that I'm familiar with in terms of how they approach the global market. They broke the business at the time into what they called agribusiness, what they called farm and ranch, and what they called agri-food. And so agribusiness was the segment we're in, so I'll come back to that and talk a little bit more deeply about that. Farm and ranch would be any of the technology, systems, and data that come off of the farm directly. Farm equipment is a massive kind of industrial IoT implementation, right? You've got GPSs driving tractors, you've got data coming off of that, you've got combines, you've got variable rate seed equipment and applicators and water management and weather sensors everywhere. And
I've heard of AI predictive models that are figuring out fertilizer levels and other things to do. Would they include that in that segment of the business as well?
For sure. I've seen equipment that drives itself down a segment of land, if you will. And while it's planting, it is in real time driving itself, determining the hybrid of seed that should go in the ground based on the soil that it knows at that particular GPS location, determining the depth at which the seed should be planted.
Wow.
And then applying any chemical or fertilizer or anything in the ratios and in the amounts that would be appropriate as the tractor drives itself, down the acre. So
the future is here.
Yeah, man, it's unbelievable. And I do like to talk about this. I'll keep this brief because we don't want to launch into political tirades and start throwing things at each other. But I personally think that production agriculture is misunderstood. Now, I don't want to get into the rabbit hole of, Monsanto and, poisoning the food supply. Listen, we're definitely eating some stuff we shouldn't be eating. But here's what I have to say. I've only on a few occasions in my career on the agribusiness side had the pleasure of sitting with the actual scientists that are doing the science. Some on the seed side, and this was at Pioneer Seed, and some on the chemical side from the various chemical manufacturers throughout the U.S. and Canada. And every interaction with them, science is what mattered. In every interaction with them, feeding the planet was what mattered to them. In every interaction with them, what kept them awake at night were people starving in this world when they knew that technology could help produce enough food for everyone. So, corporate profits aside, and corporate management aside, the people who drive those businesses are the scientists, and the scientists are as pure at heart as you and me, and their charge every day when they come in is to feed this world. And so, like I said, I think production agriculture can be a little bit misunderstood, and I think, the stuff that gets press is the bad stuff, and there's plenty of it, and there's egregious stuff like there is in every large industry, every large corporation. But I'll tell you what, the absolute meat of the population of those folks who work in those businesses are doing it hard and for the exact right reason. So
sure,
I think it's important to note.
I agree. I try to eat organic when I can. I try to avoid pesticides. I try to I try to make decisions that maybe don't lead to the highest yields because I'm selfishly trying to help myself. But I look realistically, it's not a scalable solution for 8 billion people or how many people are on this planet. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to make those decisions. But it's I'm skeptical anytime I hear somebody just demonize an entire industry. I have friends who work in the energy industry, and
same thing happens in energy for sure.
They're not trying to destroy the environment. Yeah. There may be some bad apples who get a little bit carried away and make decisions and cover
great comparison.
Things, but
it's exactly the same.
But the ones that I know, they want to power the planet. They want to bring electricity to every corner of the globe and to do it affordable. And
because they know that raises quality of life.
And that and that creates wealth that allows you to tackle clean energy. We couldn't afford clean energy 200 years ago when people were dying at the age of 40, and half of us didn't have, didn't have the basic necessities. So I think that's an important point to make, that it's anytime I hear painted with a broad brush that an industry is evil, I tend to think that, well, you could say that about ISIS. You could say that about the Nazis. There are very few industries that are involved in commerce that you can say that across the board. Healthcare, same thing.
Healthcare, same thing. Yeah. Yeah, people demonize the pharmaceutical companies, but they're saving lives every day.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to shift gears a little bit. And again, this is something I don't actually know the answer to. When you think about what you're good at, because you've obviously been very successful, do you think of yourself more as a marketer or as a technologist, as a leader? What is it? Is it a blend of everything?
Yeah. Probably for me, it's been an intersection of a few different skill sets, and I'm not sure I'm necessarily good at anything. I work pretty hard. That's probably, I think a dad told us at one time, you're an Amedio, so you're going to have to work twice as hard to be half as good as everybody else. So I think,
I think that's good advice for anybody, no matter how smart you are.
Yeah. So hard work will get you there. For me, I do think that, in particular, it was an opportune time, the last 30 years of my career, to be able to understand and execute on technology. I started as a self-taught software engineer. I have a marketing degree. Very quickly realized I wasn't really a good engineer, but I was good enough to do it and to understand it. And I quickly kind of parlayed that into, well, what does that mean to business and business people and solving problems, and kind of spent the majority of my career running companies where I was either the CEO or the CTO, but really performed kind of in what I used to refer to as a solutions architecture role, which is kind of fully understanding the problems that needed to be solved and kind of sitting at the intersection of the implication of that for business and for the teams that were trying to build software to solve those problems. So,
yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's when you combine technology with something else that it really becomes powerful. I think it's powerful to be a great technologist generalist as well. But I think it's really powerful when you combine the two and you can say, okay, what are we really trying to solve here? Or combine 3 disciplines or 4 disciplines, because technology really is an enabler. We like to think of it as a standalone thing unto itself, but we really create technology to solve problems. And I think that is very powerful when you can combine those.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's a fun place to sit too, and it's also the seat that many founders sit in initially, because even if you are a great engineer and you build something that is novel and unique from an intellectual property standpoint, if you're successful and you raise capital and try and scale, you'll very quickly be confronted with the business side of it, whether you like it or not. So you got to understand it and you got to know it. And likewise, people who are founders who start from the business perspective, but are going to be in the technology space, will have to hire and surround themselves with brilliant technologists, and understanding them and how they think and how they solve problems is super important as well too. So I think it's that centrist kind of skill set that can be uniquely valuable at times.
Yep. So I don't think you have it listed on your LinkedIn profile, but I know you're an investor and pretty involved in acceleration. They seem to be well on their way. I know Ben, I know a handful of the people over there, Marissa. So they're well on their way, obviously. Is this something you're pretty involved in, or is it more of an advisory capacity at this point?
Yeah, there's a couple of operating businesses that weren't sold with TKXS because they were separate assets. One of them is Acceleration and one of them is SureShot. They're both technology businesses. One's SureShot is data and analytics software, and Acceleration is software for rewards and recognition for everything from employee to sales and channel salespeople and that kind of thing. And they're both substantial software assets, but also decent-sized operating companies. And I am still regularly involved, but more kind of on an as-needed basis. One of our good friends and business partners, Chris Williams, really oversees our interest, our investment there, that Jack and Preston and I have, and that he has as well too. And he does so as the effective kind of, I guess, COO. I don't know exactly how they've titled him at Acceleration, but he's got a lot of operational responsibility at Acceleration and also at SureShot. And so he's really the guy for us because he's probably the smartest, the best, and the most calm, and the most rational out of all of us. So he kind of
and he's going to follow through on what he says.
Yes, and he will. He'll do exactly what he says.
He'll call you and get you on the Zoom when you're 10 minutes late.
Well, that's exactly right. Yes,
we all have to have one of those.
That's right. I'm that dude. And so he plays that role for us. So I'm not active on a day-to-day basis, but occasionally we'll attend board meetings as an observer or get involved in something specific around business development typically.
How different has that been for you compared to, you were pretty hands-on with techniques, especially in the early days?
For sure. No, I was hands-on right up until the last day at Technique. So it is very different. But both those businesses were businesses before we got involved in them, and they both have super competent and good founders that are still running and very active in those businesses. So it's quite easy in those situations between the founders and between Chris's oversight to kind of step back, and if needed, play a role. But honestly, that's infrequent. Those guys have great teams. You mentioned Marissa and other folks in that business and acceleration. They're fantastic. David, who runs Sure Shot, has a great team, and they're successful in their own right. So I haven't had to have been that involved. So I've been kind of spending time looking at other startups and other businesses around really the Southeast primarily, and ultimately waiting for the time at which we can get really active again and fire back up All In as well. So
awesome. And I do want to talk about All In because it's a fantastic charity. But first, do you think there's a next full-time thing for you, or is it more of the advisory and investing and kind of being
I get that question a lot. I get email almost every day of somebody saying, "Hey, what's your next thing?" Right? Yeah. All the people that I've worked with and over the years. I don't have a great answer. I will say I think I probably have one more left in me.
You probably have 5, knowing you.
Well, where I'm heads down day to day, growing and ultimately exiting a business. I think I can do that once more. But and for the reason that we talked about earlier, which was the work-life balance. I kind of when I get in, I'm kind of in and heads down, and I start working pretty hard. And so,
how many kids do you have?
4 kids, 4 dogs, 3 cats, a wonderful wife who had put up with me working an awful lot for the last 28 years. So I owe her and the family and everybody else some time. So,
shout out to Lacey.
Yes, she is. Most people refer to their significant others, their better half. She's like the better 90%. I just kind of squeak in there, the last 10%. But
hopefully you don't race her on the Peloton because she's going to kick your ass.
She will kick my ass. Yeah, the treadmill. You should see the treadmill stats. They're horrendous.
She has to break the treadmill.
Yeah, she crushes me. Yeah, she crushes me. So yeah, there. I probably got one more left in me. It won't be in tech because I'd like to do something else. I'd like to have another chapter. It'll probably be in a more mainstream business. So I look forward to doing that, but it'll also be with partners and with other people that can help me operate, so that I can maintain some balance.
Awesome. So I've talked about it. You've mentioned it a little bit. You've been active throughout your career as an early stage advisor and investor. How would you describe your approach to these two, and how has that changed over time, both advising companies and investing? Is it you advise the ones you invest? Do you ever advise when you don't invest? And just kind of how has that dynamic changed over time?
Yeah. I've advised a lot, both in companies that I've invested in and companies that I haven't, as well as just individual entrepreneurs that are seeking advice. I'm always available for a cup of coffee at Central Coffee's my hangout, and if you want to come.
And that's the original Central
that's
Coffee.
That's the original Central Coffee,
not the one on
South
Boulevard.
Not the one in the South. Although I'd meet at both, but yeah, the original one in Plaza Midwood. Is
I made the mistake of trying to pay for my own coffee once, and the look that you gave the lady at the front when I tried to pay, you're like, the rules.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. You can come have a cup of coffee and make a donation to All In, and I'll tell you anything you want to know about entrepreneurism. But I have done a lot of advising, and I do spend time with the companies that I invest in as well too. And it has changed a lot over the years. It's I think you learn in time how to give advice that can be more practical. So I think my advice might not be exciting, but it's probably pretty practical. That it's implementable, I hate to have conversations with entrepreneurs that result in them going away and not being able to do anything about what we talked about, right? So I focus on making sure that the things that we're talking about are things that they can affect. And so I think that's changed. Those conversations are simple, practical, implementable, a lot less lofty. But I also think that my attitude towards entrepreneurship has probably changed. I think it's really important that everybody has perspective. It took me a long time to gain perspective, and I think people can be better maybe if they have it sooner. Certainly can do better than I did and be happier than I was in some of those difficult times when I was so overworked and had trouble kind of maintaining my own mental health. So I try and have a lot more perspective. It's easy to be excited and exuberant about entrepreneurism. It's a wonderful thing. Being a business owner is like one of the greatest things that you can do. But it can come with some peril, and I think it's important that you talk about all that. And so I do a good bit of reminding folks when I can that that there's risks and that they have to be careful as well as work hard and charge ahead.
I also think I think I've picked this up from you or somehow associated it with you in my mind, but I think enjoying the journey as well. I think we get caught up in where you're going, and it's like, no, part of the fun is what you're doing right now. Enjoy what you're dealing with, the highs and the lows.
Yeah. Right? The worst thing, if anybody wants to go have coffee with me, the worst thing you can say to me is an opening statement that has something to do with how you're going to exit the business you're just starting. Yeah. Because if that's what you're thinking about, you're starting the wrong business.
You don't need to worry about it.
That's right. You got to be in the business that you're in because you love it and you're passionate about it, because you think you have something interesting to say, to do, to offer your customers, and you gotta want it for all the right reasons. And it's easy to say the money follows for some of us who have had exits. That's great, but it's just true. A business that's engineered to exit from the beginning never realizes its potential.
Yeah, I've heard it said, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure, but run the business like you want to own it forever, and you might not have to.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I couldn't agree more. And those are all great conversations. They, especially for the younger entrepreneurs. It's been nice to coach and mentor some older entrepreneurs as well too. There's a lot of great people that are leaving long careers that are getting into startups and starting businesses as well too. That I think it's fabulous because they bring a ton of life experience and a ton of business experience to startups as well too. So I like to get involved with folks across the spectrum. Awesome.
And you've been a staple of the Charlotte startup scene, air quotes here, for as long as I can remember. Can you speak to how you got involved with it? Through the years, even before I met you, I've seen you speak, moderate panels, probably 10, 15 years, but I suspect it's been started even before that. Can you just speak to how you got involved in this scene?
Yeah, sure. Well, I knew I wanted to start a business at some point. I don't know that I would have called myself an entrepreneur or that it would have necessarily been in technology, but after getting out of school and working kind of one job, I realized pretty quickly that it'd be nice to start my own business, and so I did so with a business partner here in town. And as a result, once that happens, you kind of, if you like that life, right, then you realize that you can do it. You could even do it unsuccessfully and try it again. It's one of those things that can be, if things don't go right the first time, it's okay to try again. And in fact, for most people, it doesn't go right the first time, and so you need to try and try again if you're going to be successful ultimately. So in doing that, in 1992, 93, when I started, Charlotte was, a city that was much quieter and was dominated by the financial community and a couple other big industries. It was before the Panthers were here, and
wow,
yeah, if you can believe that, yeah.
And I came here in 2005, so it's hard for me to imagine. I mean, I can imagine a lot of things that people moving here now can't imagine, but the Panthers is
the only job I ever had was in Matthews, North Carolina, which is right outside of town, and
that's what brought me here. I was working for Family Dollar as a consultant.
Oh, so right across the street from Family Dollar, or not quite across the street, but around the corner from Family Dollar was PCA International. They owned all the Kmart and Walmart photography studios before digital photography hit.
Did that become something else? Did that turn into another business?
It did, and it isn't good because
I remember one of the Family Dollar executives leaving to go to that.
Yeah,
business.
yeah. I mean, they may have exited it okay at some point or found a way to survive, but that was a transformational time in photography. And they were used to shooting film and showing proofs and selling.
Well, and in retail too, if you're.
Yeah, in retail of all places, right?
Yeah.
And so I was there, and that was 1992, and I think the last mile of my drive was on a dirt road. If that gives you any indication of what Charlotte was like back then. So there was a handful of folks around town that kind of were in the startup community at that point, and I just happened to be one of them early on in Charlotte. And so, I got the grandfather of Charlotte entrepreneur status, and so I get called on to comment and speak and that kind of thing. But it's been a blast, and at that point, everybody was learning together. Nobody knew anything especially about technology and IT and what ultimately became the internet and software and that kind of thing. So it was the dawn of a great era. And so having been involved in that, I think, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure to share that through various forms over the years.
Yeah, I've heard it called alternatively the Steve Amedio Mafia or the Mac Lackey Mafia.
Yeah, both of those are true. And Mac and I he was my first business partner, so we share a lot and overlap a lot in the people that we knew then and still know now. And it really was. I mean, there's probably 25 or 30 people that were really starting businesses back then in all of Charlotte. Mm-hmm. So we all knew each other, and we all worked hard and shared ideas. And back then it wasn't there's no competition or anything. It was just, hey, how do you survive doing this new IT thing? How do you create value? How do you build a business? How do you scale a business? How do you raise money? These were all new concepts, certainly to me and to most of the people in the startup community here in Charlotte, 25 years ago. So,
and how do you compare that to where we are now? Which I don't know that anybody can really define where we are now. But now I think you've got Avid Exchange, you've got Passport, you've got Red Ventures, you've got Pazer, you've got a bunch of Stratified, you've got all these homegrown companies that are raising lots of money and on the national and even international scene. How would you compare where we are now to where we were in 92?
Well, I would say we've come an incredibly long way and have an incredibly long way to go. So we're kind of, I think, in the middle. And, for no particular reason other than it takes time to build a substantial, entrepreneurial and startup ecosystem in a community that where it didn't exist, right? And so we've got now multiple sources of capital here, both lots of angel, which has always been, Charlotte's been a great angel community, and there's more institutional capital. There's VCs and mez folks and
even if we don't have the most established VC system. Routinely, Bain Capital is investing here. Bradfeld has made investments.
They're absolutely out of town.
DC Revolution.
Yeah, that's right. Growtech came down. So I think that capital is a big part of it. But there's more to it as well. I think there's been a host of public-private partnerships that have contributed to the entrepreneurial community. Great entrepreneurial trade groups have sprung up, which has been huge. I think back to, Terry Cox and the Business Innovation and Growth Council as being one of those early groups. The Charlotte Regional Fund for Entrepreneurs was one that was early
Venture
on.
Prize, I
Venture
suppose.
Prize, yeah. That's part of the public-private bit, right? We've really gotten involved with the universities around, and they've helped to drive.
Well, even I saw in the energy industry, Duke Energy and Siemens Energy, which is headquartered here in Charlotte, and a handful of other big energy players, they created efforts to try to drive innovation inside of the energy space. They funded the Energy Production and Infrastructure Center.
That's right.
At UNC Charlotte to the tune of $150 million.
That's
so
right.
I do think a lot of those collaborations between both public and private, but also big corporates trying to drive innovation has been interesting to see. Sure.
Corporate investment, corporate venture has been big. The banks have stepped up over the years. The other institutions around town. There's a great I'm not sure what the formal name of it is, but there's a great innovation center for the textile industry. I think in Conover, maybe.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you bring that up because one of my favorite up and coming companies is called New Fabrics.
Yeah,
yes.
I met with them not too long ago. Yeah, great entrepreneur, great founder.
Founded out of University of Washington and brought to Conover. And when I interviewed him, he had made 1 million N95 masks at a time when you couldn't find these things anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And he said, if I weren't in Conover, I couldn't have. He made 1 million in a week and a half. He said, I couldn't have done it if I didn't have the ready-made supply chain, logistics, and know-how of Conover.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been a long time coming that the Southeast in particular revisit its textile and manufacturing roots and modernize that and use it to its advantage. I mean, there's a massive history and incredible legacy of textile in the Southeast, and all those great folks who have run those businesses and own those businesses and still do, and their ability to both fund and help early stage businesses in that space, but also to modernize kind of the infrastructure for development in textile in the Southeast. I think they're ready for a really big resurgence in textile manufacturing all throughout the Southeast.
And hopefully we see something similar as our national cannabis laws move in the direction that the state cannabis laws have been moving, where we can do the same thing with a very powerful tobacco industry here in North Carolina and a strong history. You've got to imagine that as those laws start to change, we can see something similar happen where they reinvent themselves with their largely dying population of customers and into something that seems like a much healthier, but a lot of the same distribution and manufacturing concepts have to apply.
Yeah, I think you'll see that for sure. I mean, then there's a lot of the largest tobacco farms in North Carolina, at least, and have found ways to repurpose that land. It's rich in certain, minerals and is fit for the purpose of certain types of crops. They're modernizing there, and they're getting into tech as well too. So yeah, I think that's another big. North Carolina is a massive agriculture state, so there's a lot of activity in both production crop business as well as in the animal health business as well too.
So we've talked about it. One of the things I've always admired about you is the balance of your family life, which I know you're very actively involved in that, leading a fast-growing company in a rapidly changing industry. But you also started All In to fight cancer. Can you talk about the mission of All In and the progress and how long ago you created it and why?
Yeah, it was a little over 10 years ago. All In to fight cancer was, it just cracked me up, made me think of that. The funny thing I'm thinking about is when we started it, I, for some reason, thought it would be smart to call it All In for Cancer. And my copywriter, Sherry, and my creative guy, Scott Miner, who very quickly fixed that. They're like, are you really all in for cancer? I'm like, no, that's not a great name. They're like, how about All In to Fight Cancer? So it became All In to Fight Cancer, and it is and always has been to honor Rob, Eubank, who was a great entrepreneur in his own right here. As a matter of fact, Rob was one of my first customers. He came to me looking for a website for a business that was called Tech Solutions at the time. He's business partners with John Olin, who's a great entrepreneur here in town, Brian Deblitz, also a great entrepreneur, and Jeff Harris. Those guys very successfully exited that business and are investors here around town as well too, and have started additional businesses. And Rob, I was just talking about this the other day with someone. We were talking about All In. Rob was... he just was a wonderful human being, but he also, it was at the age that we were, around, our late 30s at the time when he was diagnosed. I mean, it was a total shock. He was...
that's really when you're starting your life, the bulk of your life.
You're getting ready to really get going, right? Yep. And he was he was the hard working, but he also, he took the best care of himself. He was an unbelievable athlete. He ate clean. He rarely drank. He exercised fanatically. He was a college athlete, and he led an incredibly healthy life. And a lot of us weren't leading healthy lives at that time for various reasons, whether it be personal or professional. And he was the guy that got cancer colon cancer, and he couldn't beat it. And it, although he tried like hell, nobody fought any harder than Rob fought. But ultimately, it took his life a few years later, and it was unbelievably shocking to all of us. And so As the story goes, I was with Rob in the last year of his life, and we played at a poker tournament, a Texas Hold'em poker tournament at Quail Hollow for Easter seals, I believe, for our friend Phelps Sprinkle, also an entrepreneur here in town, since moved to Greensboro, and it was heavily involved in Easter seals. We played a poker tournament and had a great time. And a bunch of Panthers.
Was he terminal at that point?
He was, yeah. I mean, he fought to the very end, trials and all sorts of stuff. So he probably would have never said that. I suppose in hindsight he was, but he wouldn't have admitted it. But we played that poker tournament and we had a great time. And but he was tired. He was two and a half years into treatment. And on the way home, he said to me, I want to do something for a legacy. I said, that's cool, Rob. What do you want to do? I'd be happy to help. He said, well, I don't know, but he said, but interesting, that was a really fun time. And I said, oh, that's great. He said, in the last couple of years, I've got invited to, every bike ride and every run and every golf tournament. And he said, and it's really hard when you're in treatment. You just don't have the energy necessarily or the time to invest in that way. And that event was great. It was fun. It was relatively quick. We had a great time. It was social. I got to share my story, and I sat at a table with a bunch of people I had never met before, and we built some relationships. And he said, that was a lot of fun. And so, we quickly came about the idea that, well, maybe we do something like that. And so I went to my creative team, and they named it, and we applied for a 501c3 charter that specifically stated, naive that we were going to play poker to raise money for cancer. And
did Dane have anything to say about Dane, your attorney?
Dane did not review that filing, I don't think. And it came to our attention a little later that, in fact, gambling was illegal in the state of North Carolina, even for charities. It kind of was in a gray area. But nonetheless, we had our first event, and nobody gave us a hard time. And we had multiple events after. And thankfully, in the last couple of years, that legislation has changed. And now for operating charities that have been in business for a while, that format is a perfectly legitimate way to raise money. And it's a great format. And so we started for that reason, and I think a lot of what Rob identified in that first time we played together in that charity event became kind of the foundation of the event for us. It was a great time. It was highly social. It was a bunch of people around a table having fun, cracking on each other, playing poker, and sharing stories and building relationships. And the cancer community could participate. And we had oncologists there and nurse navigators there and cancer survivors there from the very beginning, and they had a wonderful time. They were able to enjoy it. We turned it into a concert. We had our great friends at JJ's, John Luther, and his whole crew.
Mark Brunage,
the Whiskey Dollars started showing up and playing music, which was fantastic. And then we made it a food event and a drinking event, and before we knew it, we had really a big party with a few hundred people playing poker in the middle of it. So it turned out to be a wonderful format for fundraising and a great format for really just promoting what's going on in the cancer community and the good work of all the benefiting organizations around town. So really, we're kind of a meta charity. I mean, we don't have any specific programs. We raise money for folks that have well-established and great programs around town. So we have benefited the Nurse Navigators, the Isabella Santos Foundation, Paula Takis, multiple foundations around chemo cars, and Go Gen Go. All have been our benefiting organizations for years, and they're doing wonderful. They're doing the hard work. We're having a party, right, and raising money and kind of leaning on our corporate buddies to sponsor, like you, who's been a wonderful sponsor over the years, so thank you.
But it really is. You didn't intend for it to work this way, but it's a great place for corporates to get together with startups. I mean, that's just, I suspect, just a side effect. You probably had no idea that was going to happen, but Stratified sponsored it recently, and then you have big corporates.
Absolutely. Huge. All the biggest, the banks, the big commercial real estate folks.
The healthcare systems.
Yeah, and startups. And lots of great long-term relationships have been built at those poker tables and at that event.
Oh, at level, we literally, we were already doing work for a big corporate who I won't name just because it done that, but it probably isn't appropriate, but we brought one of our client sponsors to the event, and we talked to him, and we weren't trying to sell him any business, but we just started talking as we were playing poker and having fun together. And he calls us 2 days later and says, "Hey, I want to sign a big contract. I want to talk about how do we really get you guys building everything that we're looking at right now."
Right.
And it isn't why we invited him, but it's amazing when, what the power of something like that, where you're bringing together all these different people, they're having fun together. It's mission driven. There's a cause. It's fun. It's competitive. It just kind of checks all the boxes. So how did COVID change things for All In?
It did not go well. We had to cancel 2 events, I suppose. Now we're right in the middle of an expansion from just a Charlotte event to a Charlotte and Raleigh event, which we hope to turn back on next year. And we met as a board. We've got an active board and wonderful people that have donated tons of time to try and help us figure this thing out. And we were kind of we had to make the difficult decision, which was not to have the event. And what was more difficult is to not really do anything else. And the reason why that was important was because, we didn't want to sit by the side. We wanted to, have virtual poker tournaments, and we wanted to raise money that way, and we wanted to keep things going. But the reality was we have a fantastic organization, a great format, a wonderful brand, and we just felt like nothing else would rise to the level of the experience that people have when they're at All In to Fight Cancer. And so rather than give our wonderful and loyal sponsors and donors and attendees something less, we decided to just kind of wait and see. And much to the credit of we talked about earlier, the pharmaceutical world and science, I think sooner rather than later we'll be back at it in the original and intended format. And so as we sit here today, we have a November date on the calendar. We have it reserved, and I don't know if that will come true or not, but it certainly is looking a lot better than it was 6 months ago. And so if everything goes really well, All In will happen this November.
Awesome.
And we will have a March event in Raleigh. And so we'll be a 2-event a year organization for a couple years until we can find a third spot. And ultimately, the ultimate goal was 4 events a year and raising hopefully a little bit over $1 million a year. So
wow, that's awesome. And in the meantime, folks should be using smile.amazon.com for whatever their favorite charity is. It doesn't matter. Smile.amazon.com is the exact same user experience. You set up your charity, and a portion of every sale goes. I've done that with All In. I encourage other listeners to.
And we get checks every day. Yeah. I mean, I get checks all the time from that program. It's a great program.
Yep, absolutely.
It's a great program.
So how did creating All In change your outlook on life or on business? And I know I'm careful about your time here, because I know you and Tom are going to go do a WOD here in a minute, but I just have a couple more questions. But sure. I would like to at least talk about how maybe it's changed your outlook on things.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to Rob having cancer, my sister Julie was diagnosed with around the same time, a little earlier, with stage 4 lung cancer.
Wow.
And she has survived that for what's going on 14 years.
Wow.
She's maybe the longest survivor known to science of her specific diagnosis. Her body will end up at Sloan Kettering that treated her and be researched. I mean, it's been an unbelievable journey for her and our family. But so in my mom side of the family had cancer pretty prevalent. My dad ultimately died of prostate cancer. I got a couple brothers who've had cancer, prostate cancer. And so it was a part of our life. Rob kind of shook me up and made me start spending some real time doing it. And I think probably what changed was I would have never have realized how wonderful it could have been, because no matter how much time you give to something like that, it returns 10 or 100-fold. Mm-hmm. And the relationships that have been built, and the interactions I've had with caregivers and in the community, as well as survivors and oncologists. I've spent tons of time with these folks over the years, and that's just it's given back so much to me. And of course the cancer community, but it changed my perspective on the importance of being involved, in the community. And I probably wasn't that heavily involved, honestly, before that. And so it taught me a very valuable lesson. And hopefully matured me a little bit, and it made me a better person, and that's been great. And you know, I know that we've talked a lot about entrepreneurism. I think, you know, the other thing that I've realized is you just never know, you know, you never know, right? When you wake up, are you healthy today? Are you going to be healthy tomorrow? You never know who you're going to meet in that process or in life that may become sick or ill, and may be cancer, may not be cancer. And so it was a big eye opener for me, and something that you know, I'll be spending the rest of my life, you know, being involved in and doing.
Well, you mentioned eye-opening, and for me, the eye-opening thing was the first time I saw you get up and have people raise their hand if they have a family member who has cancer or a friend, and it's amazing because everybody's standing. I mean, we literally probably don't know anybody who hasn't been impacted by this.
We had I remember that specific exercise we did at one of the all-ins, and I can tell you there was probably 750 people at that event. And it didn't take but about 3 questions. Do someone you know or love, or somebody who you work with, have cancer? And the entire room was standing, you know?
Yep.
So, you know, it's a brutal disease, and incredibly common, unfortunately. But we're getting there. Science is progressing, and more people are beating it all the time. The survival rate for a lot of cancers is much higher than it's ever been. And so I think the things that everyone's doing in the cancer community, from the science side to the fundraising and the charitable side, the caregiver side, they're all extending life, extending quality of life, and finding cures. So
it's interesting because I've been reading, or in my case, it's mostly listening, but I call it reading because it's books.
Yeah, I'm a big audiobook guy.
The audiobook, yeah. But there's so many advances, as you talk about, in cancer treatments and therapies. I think a lot of it comes back to the fairly recent mapping of the genome and really understanding some of the science behind what's happening, and some of the epigenetics behind it as well. It seems very encouraging, which has to be gratifying to you. Are there any treatments or therapies or other advances that particularly encourage you and All In today?
Yeah, I would have to say I think you hit the nail on the head with genetics, and I think what's happening with EDIT and with CRISPR, which are the foundational technologies that are going to allow us to do gene editing, are going to make a tremendous difference in the cancer community. I think biological medicine and medicine that's targeted to the individual, based on their individual biology, is going to make a tremendous difference in quality of life and extension of life. And, you know, even the simple things that, or I say simple, but that seem more straightforward, that aren't necessarily, a new discovery of a molecule or something like that. I think about the treatment that my sister had as part of her treatment course to remove cancer from her brain was something called the CyberKnife. And, you know, that's become, less invasive and almost robotic and incredibly precise. And so, you know, they can go in and take out cancers without damaging much or any of the rest of the body in certain circumstances. And so I think across the board, there's been innovation, and not the least of which as well is, you had mentioned 23andMe earlier, is the data. I think that data and analytics.
Oh, the protein folding that's involved in cancer forming, and now we can literally map this thing
exactly right.
Relatively cheaply.
Yeah, no, that's right. We can map it and we can predict it, and so I think, my greatest hope, I guess for where treatment goes, and not just for cancer, but for all disease, but specifically for cancer, is to a place where we're using technology and data to be preventative. If you have your DNA mapped with 23andMe and you have a family history of cancer, I believe that there's going to be things that you can do very proactively early in life now that will substantially change the potential outcome there. I think we've just been, we've been very reactive because that's all we could do. The science is complex. It's a complex disease. And so we've found ways to treat and extend life, and we found some cures, but I think we're on the cusp of being on the front end of that with technology and data, and analytics, AI, and machine learning and all that fun stuff, where we can give people a path to wellness much early on, and actually prevent a lot of these cancer diagnoses and diseases.
I agree, and I think the self-quantification revolution that's happening is amazing. I mean, recently I read a book on detoxification, and it got me really not worried, but like thinking about the heavy metals that are entering my body from all sorts of different sources. And I did a quick search and landed on Everlywell, where I've done 3 or 4 home tests, and they had a heavy metals test.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
cool site.
It's great. And recently raised a $75 or $80 million round of funding. We talked about 23andMe. Viome is now a company that's doing analysis of your gut biome.
That's right.
I think these things are very interesting because the price has come down so cheap, and as they get further and further down and become commodities, it's amazing to think about what sort of therapies will be developed based on just unlocking the individual code of the individual.
Yeah, the cost side of that is, I think, exactly right, and the key. I mean, I think that at scale, kind of the institutional side of the healthcare business. In the insurer side, it's been difficult for them, to manage cost. And what's happened is technology has driven down the cost of some of this stuff, but not just in the treatments, but also, as you're indicating, in these tests. Right now, you can order very inexpensively without having to worry about, is it covered by my health insurance, a gut test, a DNA test.
$150, and they can tell you Viome can map every single bacteria strain in your stomach for $150 and help you make sense of it.
And testing is huge, especially in cancer. Yep. Early, warning tests for colon cancer and for breast cancer and all that kind of stuff now can be performed more accurately at home. I wish I could remember the name, but I read a presentation from an early stage business out on the West Coast not too long ago, who has a camera filter. It's not really a filter; it's a lens adapter that you can screw onto your iPhone, take pictures of yourself, and it maps all of the moles and will predict which of your moles are potential to be melanomas.
Which is amazing. I have an executive doctor, and he does that every year. He takes the picture, and
that's right.
It compares.
But
that's easily.
Can you imagine that in the hands of every consumer?
That's easily a $50,000 piece of equipment that he had to buy.
An iPhone can do it now with the right software and a little lens adapter. So I think there's tons of opportunity in the healthcare tech space as well. Sure, very fruitful place for entrepreneurs, no question.
Sure. So before I let you leave, I have to talk a little more fitness, just because you do own a gym.
Yeah, I do.
I've done some insane workouts with you. You work out hard, and you're well known around town for working out in sweatpants and a hoodie, even when it's 95 and 98% humidity.
That's right.
I'm not going to get into why you do that, but because that would be hours. But we've done high intensity sprints. We've done brutal weightlifting sessions where it's just doing way more barbells than we ever should, or running on hills, or putting weight vests on.
Yeah, that's right.
And some of these days you've played soccer for an hour or two in the morning with people half your age.
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, someone can actually be half my age and play soccer. That's correct.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
But can you speak to how you balance these different modalities? Is there a balance you try to strike, or do you just whatever you feel like doing? That's you just able to listen to your body, or how do you think about different workouts?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, unfortunately, you got to recognize it's a little bit age related. Some of the younger folks that are involved in some of the stuff that I do, can handle more and they can recover quicker. But generally, I think that I've been in CrossFit, as you have been, for a long time, and functional fitness is important. Cardio fitness is also important. Mobility is hugely important.
And having fun. I think the soccer is the fun part that we tend to forget in fitness. Right?
Soccer probably beats me up more than any of the other workouts that I do, but it is the thing that I do that from the second I step on the pitch until the second I step off, I have a giant smile on my face, right? So I got to keep doing it. Mountain biking is like that for me. But I do think that I have figured out in the last probably 10 or 15 years, and some of it, again, age-related, some of it maybe to avoid injury, which becomes a bigger issue as you get older, is that the best kinds of workouts are functional workouts, but also a diversity of workouts, if not for the physical benefit of activating different modalities and allowing different parts of your body time to recover, and if not also for avoiding injury, for the sheer pleasure of working out, because you're not going to keep doing any of it if you're not having a good time. And so finding the fun in working out for me oftentimes is being pretty diverse about the things I'm doing. I love sports. I love all kinds of sports. And I like all kinds of working out. And I think that's what's kept it interesting. I think you can people can get in a pretty brutal groove if you're doing just one or two things and you're doing it hard all the time. And so I think that diversity is for as much fun as it is for listening to my body and for avoiding injury.
I couldn't agree more. The one thing I've really in the last year or two taken to is I view hiking and walking in general, but especially hiking is a really good,
fantastic.
Especially as I've gotten older and I can't just do a CrossFit workout
That's right.
5 times a week. It just doesn't make sense. That's
mental clarity. I can imagine this is mountain biking's like this for me. I think partly because we're in the woods and you would be when you're hiking typically, but walking just anywhere is fantastic exercise. Yeah. But I'm never as clear mentally as I am when I'm on a mountain bike surrounded by the hills and the trees and the trails.
When I hear birds chirping and the air is clean because there isn't a car in sight, and you're around trees and you hear the water running. It's just
it's amazing.
It's great.
Yeah,
so.
I think a lot of people have learned that this year. How the importance of getting outside. The outdoor industry is exploding, which is wonderful. And I think as a result, there's been some great policy moves of the current administration and even the prior administration to expand public lands and to improve and help the urgency around conservancy. And I think that's been a big thing. If you try and pull some of the positives that happened as it relates to COVID, which can be difficult, but one of them is a return to the outdoors. And my hope is that trend continues because it's been fantastic.
Yeah, it really made me appreciate when they closed the state parks. I was very happy when they reopened them and put some sensible guidelines in place during the lockdown, because that's a healthy way to
that's right
to deal with quarantine and lockdown. But also, it made me really appreciate the greenway system here in Charlotte.
Fantastic!
There was
the
some
investment over the
made.
last 20 years have been fantastic.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, look, Steve, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to do it again sometime soon once we figure out what the next big thing is for you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Be happy to come back. Thanks,
All right.
John.
Cheers.
All right.